Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's presentation. And thank you to Only About Children for putting on another night through their Grow With Us parenting series. For those who haven't met me before, I'm Dr. Kaylene Henderson. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist from the Gold Coast, and I'm delighted to be a parenting partner of Only About Children. This is the topic I've been asked to speak about tonight, and it is actually my favourite topic of all the topics that I'm ever asked to speak about in relation to parenting children. I actually think this one's the most important. So I'm delighted that you've made the effort to either be here tonight or watch the recording afterwards. For those of you who've seen me touch on this subject before, the first series of slides may seem familiar, but then we'll dive a little deeper. And you'll see what I mean as we go. There'll be time for questions at the end, so I'll give you a little cue as we near the end when to start popping your questions in the chat box so that they can be there once we hit the end. So save them up as we go, and hopefully you'll take home something from this evening's presentation. Okay, now the reason I think this is such an incredible topic, such an incredibly important topic, is because if we get this foundation right, if we build a secure relationship with our children, then we provide them with the best long-term outcomes. We really allow them to fulfill their potential, their full potential in life. We influence how they learn to see themselves and their place in the world, how their self-esteem develops, whether they learn to behave in a socially appropriate way, how they learn to regulate their emotions, how they learn to relate to others. Whether they learn to kind of problem solve and be resilient, how independent they are, how capable of having close relationships with their friends and future romantic partners they are. Incredibly, we even influence how well they do at school and how their brain develops based on the quality of our early relationship. We know from research that two children who might be otherwise completely identical, if one has a secure relationship with their parents or caregivers and another doesn't, then we already know that this first child will be at an advantage through their schooling academically. So it's an incredibly far-reaching topic when we think about secure relationships. And yet, those of you who've heard me speak before will know that I always start here because I think it's worth explaining that we will all have a different idea of what it means to have a secure relationship with our child, to have a quality relationship with our child, because we've all been parented differently. We've all had different experiences of what that looks like. So there's a concept relating to memory that I wanted to share with you for those who haven't heard me speak before. Often when we think about memory, we think about this type of autobiographical memory, this kind of explicit memory, which are the kinds of memories that have a story with you in them. You can tell me a memory of, you know, your day at work today, or your favourite travel memory, or the day your child was born. These memories are encoded in language, so you won't have these kind of memories from when you were really little, when you were 0, 1, 2 years old, because you didn't yet have the language skills to encode those memories. But the other kind of memory, which is really important, particularly when we think about this topic here tonight, is this type of implicit memory known as procedural memory. Now, these are the memories not of things that have happened to us, but of how you do things, and in particular, how you do things that you need to be able to do on autopilot. So how you ride a bike, for example. You may or may not be able to recall a story of the day you learned to ride a bike. It might just be too far back in the abyss of all those other autobiographical memories. But chances are, if I put you on a bike, you could just get on with the job. You could just get on and ride your bike. Do it the way it ought to be done, because you've got these procedural memories laid down. They don't feel like you're remembering. There's no story attached to them. You can just get on autopilot. Now, the reason I always mention this is the way that we were parented is encoded as procedural memory, so that when we grow up and we become parents, we can just get on and parent. We can just get on and have the kind of relationship that with our children that we're having on autopilot, that feels like we're riding a bike. It feels like we're doing it the way it ought to be done. The tricky thing is, not all of us will have had the kind of relationship that the research supports as being the most helpful in terms of providing children with long-term outcomes. And many of us would know this. Many of us would know that there's things we'd prefer to do differently from the way we were raised and the way our parents did with us. But it's really hard to know what to do if we've never been shown it. If it's not the way that we've been raised, it's hard to know what to do instead. It's easy to say, well, I won't be doing that, but it's hard to know what the alternatives are unless we hear about them. So I think it's just helpful to recognise that we've all come to this place all doing our best without question. But for many of us, a good percentage of us, there will be hopefully tips and tricks we talk about tonight that we can add in to make our relationship with our children even stronger. Now, when we look at what the research tells us, the research points to the decades of attachment research that exists now. And we know, certainly as a child psychiatrist, this is really the foundation of all that we do now. We know that this is incredibly important for children. And it's quite simple when it comes down to it. Attachment just refers to the bond between your child and you, or their main caregivers. So you and perhaps a couple of others. And what they look for in that relationship is to have someone meet their needs when they're out exploring, playing and learning in their world. So using you as a secure base from whom they to venture forth and become more independent, but also to be their safe haven, meeting their needs for comfort when they need to come back into you. One of the programs I'm trained in is Circle of Security, and some of you may have heard of that before or done the program yourself. That describes this way of going, exploring, learning and coming back to us in this circular way, which is easy to kind of conceptualize then. But all of our children are doing this from the very beginning. They are always toddling out, looking, exploring, learning, playing, but then coming back into us when they need us. Children are actually hardwired to do this from the very beginning. So it's not our job to do something to our children or to make this happen. It's actually our job simply to respond to their needs as they're exploring and as they're coming back to us. And this is a little whirlwind tour that I've taken some of you on before at the start of some of my other talks, but we'll dive into it a bit more deeply in the latter half of the talk tonight. So these are some of the key needs that they're looking for as they're out learning and exploring and playing. You'll see the top 4 on that list there relate to those moments. And then also what they need from us when they're coming back into us for comfort. The key with building a secure attachment relationship with our children is meeting their needs both ways, meeting their needs as they're exploring, playing, learning, becoming more independent, but also welcoming them back into us if they need time to regroup or some comfort when they're having a hard time, fallen over, feeling overwhelmed, whatever the case may be. So we'll run through these briefly. The first one on that list is that children have a hardwired need to be watched over. They actually haven't learnt yet what's safe and what's dangerous in the world, and they need to know that there is an adult with more life experience who's got their backs, watching over them, who's going to keep them safe, make sure they're not eaten. It makes sense. It's an evolutionary thing. The tricky thing is that children will stop learning, exploring, playing when they're not being watched over because they're no longer having this need being met. Where that comes into play, though, is where you duck into the next room to take a phone call. Your child might be playing beautifully, independently. You duck out into the next room, and I'm sure you've experienced the fact that your child will, within seconds, toddle in after you and find out what you're doing. Equally in the mornings, because so I've got 3 children now. They're all a little bit older. But I remember reflecting on this once when they were younger because I found the mornings really tricky for a while, and we're all trying to get out of the house, go to our various places that we need to be, work, childcare, school, wherever it might be. When I would kind of make requests of my children in the mornings, hey, can you just go and put your shoes on and brush your teeth? And then I would try and get ready at that point. Inevitably, no shoes would end up on feet and no teeth would end up brushed. And what I realised is children still need to be watched over. Like, inevitably, they would come in and try to find out what I was doing or call out and try to get my attention. And it kind of makes sense when you realise they've got this need. So what I realised is that I either needed to get up a little bit earlier than them and get myself ready before they got ready so I could stick with them, or we all quite commonly got ready together. You know, we all put our shoes on at the same time, or we brushed our teeth at the same time. You got to, I think, understanding children's needs makes it easier to understand how your busy day can work best. Accommodating your children's needs and having realistic expectations of what they can and can't do. Delighting in them is incredibly important. This is the way your face lights up, your eyes light up, and the way your body turns towards someone when you're with them. And it communicates, I'm delighted that you exist. You haven't had to do anything, say anything. I'm just delighted that you exist in my world. Now, when your children see you light up just because you've spotted them at pickup time, or you've, you know, seen them wake up in the morning, or, I don't know, watch them across the room, have some lovely discovery while they're out playing, it makes them feel really good about themselves, because you are hands down the most important person in the universe to your child. Hopefully we've all got those people in our lives that when you just kind of rock up, someone lights up because you're there. I know I often have that experience with a couple of uni girlfriends, so we hardly ever get together, but when we do manage to turn up at the same place at the same time, we're all delighted, and you can see it. It's, you know, everyone lights up to be together, and it does make you feel really good about yourself. Now, it's no surprise for children then that the research suggests that being delighted in those early years is the foundation for self-esteem development. When your child sees repeatedly over time that they are someone who can make someone really important like you light up, it makes them feel like a really worthwhile, lovable, valuable person. So that's where self-esteem comes in. Interestingly, delight, for those of you with babies, it's also been shown to promote brain development, which I think is magic. You know, the way you hold yourself can promote the brain development in another human as you're gazing at them. That's magical. And those of you who've heard me speak on this topic before will also know that I also give the tip that those babies who've been shown more delight in that first year of age are said in the research to grow into more cooperative 2-year-olds. So I think that's a cracking incentive if you haven't started delighting in your baby already. Delight, delight, delight. But you can see why it's really important. And you can also see as we go through these that these aren't things that take extra time. Delighting in your child doesn't take extra time. I'm well aware that we are all crazy level busy and our days feel really full. So I'm not going to suggest you do anything that adds hours into your day. It's just about making moments happen that really matter for your children and that actually make a really meaningful difference. And delighting in them is definitely one of those things that we can do that makes a powerful difference for our children. The next one on the list you'll see is sharing enjoyment with our children. So having fun with them, doing fun activities. I know this is really hard too at the end of, at the end of a big day, but children don't need a lot of time. They need quality time. And if you've got an option for 5 minutes to lie on the ground with them and, have a wrestle or snuggle up and read a book together or play Snap or anything really, sing a silly song, each take turns making up a song about your day, that few minutes, those few minutes spent together it's incredibly important. It absolutely strengthens your bond with your child. But equally, these are the kind of memories that, our childhood memories are made out of, these moments with mum, dad, carer. So they're very powerful too. But I will just say too, there's a little disclaimer in that one. You've got to be really careful not just to enjoy your child when they're doing the right thing or when they've achieved something. So we don't just enjoy our children when they're well behaved, when they're sitting quietly, when they haven't cried, when they run really fast in the race or whatever it might be. The risk when we do that, and many of us would know adults like this, many of us would be adults like this, if we don't delight in our children for who they are inside, just for who they are as a person, but we focus on those external achievements, then we raise children who don't have an internal sense of worth but an external sense of their worth, who always feel like they need to do the right thing, they need to be obedient, or they need to achieve something in order to be considered worthwhile by others. And we don't want that for our children. Helping children just enough is the next one on that list too. Now, this applies to both social and physical situations, and this one is the key to really building independence. Now, the key here is helping our children when they need help with a task, just enough that they can do it by themselves. So providing that sort of scaffolding so that we can find that sweet spot. So providing them just enough help that they can do it. So whether that's passing the puzzle pieces to them the right way up so that they can, are more likely get a sense of where that goes, helping them to, loosen their shoes before they try to put them on so that they can have that sense of achievement, but we've helped them only just enough. Without our help, they wouldn't be able to do it at all, but we haven't done all the helping for them. Because this is really important as children develop that sense of competence, they extend upon their skills, they get a sense that they are a capable little person, which of course they are, and helps them to become more independent. I always think of one of my children with this one, because when she was really little, she was 18 months of age, she used to do this really cool thing that when we helped her just enough and she managed to succeed at a task that was previously too tricky, she would throw her arms up in the air and couldn't yet say, yes, I did it by myself, but instead she goes, self. And in those self moments, which funnily enough, we still refer to self moments, and even though my children are much older now, you do watch your children become more capable, more confident. They got the sense that I've got this, which ties into resilience too, which we're not going to touch on today, but which is also important as we're striving to bring out the best in our children. Now, the other way that we can help our children just enough is by doing that with our older children, even when they're facing tricky social situations. So when you have a child that comes home and says, my friend said they won't play with me anymore, for example, it's not for us to jump in and solve that, because if we did, we're not leaving them any better equipped to handle that situation next time. But instead, we go through these steps for them, scaffolding this problem-solving approach so that ultimately we're helping them just enough to be able to solve their own problems. And over time, we'll be able to do less as we see that they kind of take the reins and they've had practice at doing this and they'll become effective problem solvers. But as your children are very young, we have to kind of start by scaffolding that, going through these 4 steps. So checking we've got the problem right. So your friend said she didn't want you playing with her anymore. Oh, how does that make you feel? Yeah, I can imagine. Acknowledging their feelings there in step 2. And then importantly, we say, do you feel like you need to do anything about it? What ideas have you got? Okay, which one are you going to go with? Sounds like you've got this. You can see it's about empowering them to make that decision for them, to choose what outcome they're going to go with, and to convey to them that sense of, you've got this, you're a capable little person, and you can turn to me if you need more help with this down the track too. Now you'll see last on the list, as children come into us, they'll come into us either because they're upset, and we'll touch on that in a moment, but sometimes they'll just come into us because they just want a little bit more us time. They might just want to cuddle, or they might want to sit on your lap for a little while before they go out and play again. They might just want a little bit of touch. Funnily enough, my 15-year-old did this tonight. I noticed when I was cooking dinner, she just came over and put her head on my shoulder. And I thought, oh, this is one of those moments. And I just put my arm around her. And then after a while, she was, she'd had a fill and off she went. I'm sure you notice those moments with your children too. They're just kind of coming in, getting their fill of you again, and then venturing out again. And our children actually do this all the time. Sometimes, obviously, they'll come to us, well, not sometimes, quite often, given the age of your children, because they're still learning how to manage their feelings by themselves. They'll come to you because they're upset. Now, there's a whole other webinar on that topic, so I'm not going to dive into what we do in this situation in too much detail, other than to remind you, if you have watched that one before, or to mention for those who haven't, who are new to these webinars, that the key in this situation is to respond to our children in the same way we would respond to anyone, and that's actually providing connection and empathy. We know from brain studies that children respond in the same way that adults do. They calm down most efficiently when they're met with connection and empathy. When we stop what we're doing, we show them with our facial expression that we understand that they're feeling sad or confused or cranky or whatever it might be, and we show them that we get it, that we're there for them, and we stick with them until they're feeling better and we can figure out what to do next. As I say, I'm not going to dive into that. There's obviously a lot more I could say about that, but I'll point you to the next webinar so that we can spend more time on this topic after these slides. I will just mention that a lot of those other things that our parents might have done, again, because of their autopilots, no one sets out to do something that's, not in keeping with the research, but our parents would have been operating on their own autopilots, their own procedural memories, as were their parents, You would have come from a line of parents absolutely doing their best, but honestly, we're the first generation to have been gifted with this research, so I think we're probably the luckiest. We know that distraction or just talking at a child or explaining all the reasons why they needn't be upset, certainly setting them to time out, punishing them, any of those other things that might have been done to us are not the most efficient way for their activated brain systems to calm down. It's actually just being with someone who gets it, who connects with them and conveys that empathy. And again, I'd encourage you to dive into that webinar if you want to learn more about that topic. Now, those of you with infants, those of you with babies who are yet to start crawling, you might be wondering, well, how does this relate if my baby's yet to kind of go out, venture into the world, learn, explore, play, and then come back to me? Fascinatingly, babies are doing this from the very beginning. Our children are doing this from the very beginning. But of course, they can't venture out in terms of crawling or walking yet. So they'll venture out with their eye gaze. They'll look out to explore and learn about their world a bit more, and then they'll check back in with you. So they do this going and coming, but it's with their eye gaze. And the key for us as parents, again, is not to think, how can I kind of make this happen? It's just to respond to your children's needs. So when your baby's looking out, they'll either be looking out because they're keen to learn about their world, or they'll be looking out because it's so intense, gazing into their favourite person's face, and it's so exciting and a bit overwhelming that they actually need to just kind of check out for a bit. So they might just look out, take a few moments, calm their system down, and then come back to you. So they might be feeling okay, or they might actually be feeling not okay and just need a moment to themselves for a bit. I need you to just wait for them. And then when they come back into us, that's either to resume this lovely babbling conversation, or to laugh, or to sing together, or whatever it is you're doing, hear about all the groceries they're going to be buying at the shops with you later on. Or they might be checking in with you because they actually need comfort, because a lot of things overwhelms baby systems. So again, it's just about thinking they're either going out, coming back, are they okay, are they not okay, what do they need from me in this moment? So the same model applies. It's just about, seeing that in action in your child. Now, it seems reasonably straightforward when we go through that list to meet our children's needs as they're going out and exploring in these ways, and also to be their comforting go-to person when they're overwhelmed. And that's how we form a secure attachment for our children, by meeting their needs both ways. And yet the research tells us that 55 to 65% of our children have a secure attachment. So 55 to 65% of our children have had their needs met often enough for there to be a pattern. This is not ever about being perfect or getting it right every time. None of us do, myself included. But it's about a pattern developing that you respond to their needs and meet their needs more often than not when they're going out, exploring and playing, and also when they're coming back into us, which leaves 35 to 45% of children presumably having had their needs not met in this consistent way. Now, these are population studies this figure comes from, which means it's not just children, it's all of us. 55 to 65% of us have a secure attachment pattern, 35 to 45% of us don't. And so I'm speaking to us as a group, acknowledging that many of us won't have had this experience from our own parents. And it's incredibly important for us to recognise that because of our autopilots, there's a chance that we're also not confidently meeting our children's needs in one or both of these ways, and perpetuating the same patterns. So again, I think it's wonderful you're here tonight. We're learning whatever we can. I've learnt about a lot of this on my journey through my training and parenting as well. And I think we're very lucky to learn as much as we can as parents. So of that 35 to 45%, the bulk of those children and us will have what's called an insecure attachment style. And I'll come back and talk about what that means in a moment. And 10% or thereabouts will have what's called clinically a disorganized attachment style. Now, for children with a disorganized attachment style, that means that their parent or caregiver, for whatever reason, hasn't been able to meet their needs either when they're going out, exploring, playing, nor have they been able to meet their needs when they need comfort. And this can happen for all sorts of reasons. The tricky part is for this 10% of children, this is associated through lots of research. We know that these children have poorer outcomes, poorer academic outcomes, mental health outcomes, criminal outcomes, a high risk of drug and alcohol use and all sorts of things that we don't want for our children, obviously. The remaining, now I'm going to do some sort of crazy maths in my, it's too late at night for this and I haven't had a coffee for several hours. 25 to 35%, and I'm sorry right now this is being recorded, I hope that's accurate, of our children will have an insecure attachment style, which means that we as parents have been comfortable meeting their needs one way, but less so the other. So for some children, it will be that we've been comfortable meeting their needs when they're out exploring, playing, but we're much less comfortable when they come into us needing comfort, because presumably we haven't had the experience of being comforted in the ways that I've spoken about by our own parents. And then the flip side of that is some children will be confident coming into us for comfort, but less confident because we're less confident meeting their needs when they're out wanting to be independent and explore. We have a tendency to want to keep them close, presumably again because of our own autopilot, are less comfortable with them being independent, exploring, taking risks. And so we've tended to kind of keep them close and limit them exploring and becoming more independent. So you can see how these things come about and these patterns are passed on. The beautiful point now is that attachment styles are not fixed. That's the take-home message from that, though. We know there are benefits for children with secure attachment styles, these 55 to 65%. Some of the things that I've listed there, but there's others, all of which we want for our children. The good news is attachment security is not fixed. And so regardless of the patterns you may have got into with your children to date, they can absolutely be changed. And it doesn't matter how old your child is. It doesn't matter if you also have older children, well beyond their only about children years. It's about recognising ourselves, the patterns we've got into with our children, recognising the ones that we want to continue because we know they're going to benefit them, and the ones that we want to tweak or change because we realise, well, we can see how they came about, presumably because of the way we were parented, but we want to try things a bit differently now that that saying, once we know better, we can do better. So that's what I would encourage you to do if you're thinking at this point in the presentation, okay, I think I'm confident with a few of those, but I think perhaps, when my children come to me for comfort, I don't know how to feel comfortable in that situation. I'm not confident that I'm doing it in the ways that you're suggesting. Then we can upskill and we can absolutely change patterns and benefit our children enormously when we do. And the same goes on the flip side of that. If you feel like I'm good with comfort, but I feel super uncomfortable when my child is taking risks or away from me, and it's led to some separation issues or whatever it might be with your child, then again, we dive into that, you learn more, and you try different strategies, again, always with the aim to bring out the best in your children, and it's absolutely doable. It is never too late. To be completely frank with you, we'll feel really uncomfortable doing things differently from the way that you have been doing things, because it would be like me asking you to ride your bike differently. After you've been riding it this way your whole life, it would feel really unnatural and like against your instinct. But when we know that this new way actually benefits our children, we can just keep driving forward until it becomes second nature, or until it becomes incorporated in our autopilots as this new and improved autopilot. So where to start? If you're thinking, okay, well, either my child isn't at 55, 65%, they do have a secure attachment pattern, but gee, life gets crazy busy and I'm not sure that I'm, always connecting with my child the way I'd like to. Or if you're thinking, no, I do want to change things, and again, where to start, just bring it back to connection. To your child, you're everything. You are the center of their universe. They are hardwired to seek connection from you and to demonstrate their needs to you in ways that once we see it, we can start to pick up on and respond differently. But if we're looking for a place to start, I would start with these few tips I'm going to go through now. The first is touch. Touch is incredibly powerful. Life is busy, the days are busy, and I find these little moments of touch, these little moments of connection kind of add up throughout the course of the day. I use touch a lot with my children, even when they're, when they're all sitting having their brekkie, for example. I'll sort of go along and just kiss them all on the head as I go past. Or I'll often pop an arm around them when they're near me telling me a story. I'll often, if I'm reaching past one of them to grab the Weet-Bix, I'll pop my arm around whoever I'm reaching past. Touch, I think, is incredibly powerful and connecting, and children often relate beautifully to touch. So that's something to bring in if you haven't already. Again, if it just hasn't been in your autopilot. Talk with your children, assuming they're able to talk, but no, I mean, babies still talk. They might not speak in the way that we speak yet, with, full grammatically correct sentences, but their babble, their cooing, that's still their conversation. And we're teaching them very early conversational skills when we listen to them babble. And then we say, oh, that's very interesting. I'm glad you told me about your day. And then we have the turn telling them about our day. We're actually teaching them early conversational skills, and we are providing this beautiful, valuable, brain-growing experience for them. But assuming many of your children are older, do talk about your day, ask them lots of questions, be curious, let them know what's great about them. Say, thank you, my helpful kid. I love how kind you are. Gosh, you're funny. I love hearing about, your stories, whatever it might be. Protect certain times for conversation. So in the car, at meal times, at bedtime, try and keep devices, phones out of these situations so that you can just talk and catch up, because the day does get busy, and often when you land at home, then everyone can often be at risk of going in different directions. There's dinner to be cooked, there's, little people to bath, there's all sorts of things to be done. So really protecting the moments where you are together at mealtime, in the car, and making the most of those moments. It's incredibly important. If they do need to talk about their worries, then often avoiding eye contact's better, perhaps just scooching in, beside them in bed at night to have a listen to them, and provide predictable opportunities for talk. So even if they know that their evenings might be a little bit busy, they know you're going to jump in beside them in bed, and, there'll be a few moments there to catch up on anything that might be worrying them. Equally, make sure you listen. Just having conversations. It's only valuable if you're really listening. Listen earnestly to anything your children want to tell you, no matter what. If you don't listen eagerly to the little stuff when they're little, they won't tell you the big stuff when they're big, because to them, all of it has always been big stuff. I love this quote, and every time I share it, it's a reminder for me as a mum too, isn't it? We are laying the foundation for how we want our children to flourish, but also how we want our relationship to be going forward as they get older, as they become teenagers, as we become adults. We want them to think of us when they think, I really want someone to listen to this, or I really want someone to talk to. We want them to think of us as being that person that's available to them. Being in charge is really important, but the way that we're in charge is how we make the difference. There's a risk of falling either side here. It's about finding that sweet spot, that perfect balance. There's a risk of being too permissive or weak in a way, in which case our children are just going to walk all over us and ignore us. There's equally a risk, and often this is influenced by the way we're parented, there's equally a risk that we'll be too harsh and strict. And when we do that, it's really hard to have a quality relationship with someone who's really harsh to us. Well, it's virtually impossible. And the other risk is our children won't necessarily learn to do the right thing in life. They'll just learn to try not to get busted by you. And that's not what we want either. What we're aiming for is that middle ground, that no-nonsense tenderness is how I've heard it described. And it's a phrase that I've loved and shared for years now, where you can be in charge. You are the person who sets the rules, sets the boundaries, keeps your children safe, but you don't need to be mean about that. You can be kind and fun, and you can get it when they're upset about it. You can say, I know, I wish we could stay up all night and watch movies too. That'd be awesome. But we both need to sleep. So we're going to turn this off now. I'm going to give you a big cuddle because I can see you feeling upset about it, and then we'll get ready for bed. You can set the rules, stick to the rules, be consistent, and be that in charge person, but also be kind about it. Providing downtime is really important too. There's so many amazing opportunities available to our children. We can want them to do everything, to try everything, all these things that, particularly that weren't available a few years ago or a couple of years ago with, lockdowns and things. There's a risk of overscheduling our children. What tends to happen though is that we burn them out, and also we kind of miss out on moments that we might have otherwise just spent connecting with them and, having a laugh, or hearing about their day, or allowing them to share their worries with us, or whatever it might be. So having a think about how your week runs and whether there's enough space in there for downtime and connection is important. As is being a good role model. At the end of the day, what you want to aim to be is a good human raising a good human. To do that, you need to model what it's like to be kind, to be compassionate, to be patient, even when you're tearing your hair out, watching them, take 50,000 times longer to put their shoes on than you would have if you did it yourself. We do need to think about the kind of qualities that we want to instill in our children and demonstrate that. Say sorry when you muck up. Consider how you talk about yourself and about others. Be really careful not to judge yourself and judge others, because otherwise children are naturally learning from us and they'll learn to do the same. And equally be mindful about how you use technology. If your child's telling you a story and you pick up your phone, because phones are compelling and sometimes more compelling than the story your child is telling you, is the reality of it. It's also really important to think, would I be okay about my future teenager doing this to me down the track while I was telling them a story? And the answer is probably no. So again, what you're modelling for them is really what you're teaching them to do down the track. So we need to be a bit careful about what it is that we're teaching them and whether those lessons are what we really want them to learn. Avoiding power struggles is really important too. If you're having a challenge with your child, always try to align with your child against that struggle, against that challenge, against that problem, whatever it might be, rather than lining up against your child for a fight. Because no one wins when you line up against your child for a fight, because they're learning from you. They will dig their heels in just as much. We've all done it, and we would all know that it's a lose-lose situation. So instead, when you're facing a problem with your child, again, this is about maintaining strong relationships. And also, along the way, teaching a whole lot of life skills. And when you align with your child to problem solve together, then you're teaching them good conflict resolution skills. You're teaching them not to line up for a fight whenever they disagree with someone, but to try to figure it out together. So the way you would word that is something like, I'm going to draw on my own personal experience here. Hey guys, we're finding it really hard to get out the door in time for school. How do we do this better? Yeah, what do we need to do? What do you guys think? Do we need to wake up earlier? Do we just need to be a bit quicker with our jobs? How do we make this work better? And then ideally, and honestly, you can do this with very young children, because then they feel like, okay, so what can I pitch in here? And then because they're pitching in, they feel like they're kind of contributing to the solution, and you've got that buy-in into actually doing these things that are suggested that you mightn't if you just kind of shout those demands at your child. But you can use that strategy, all the time, no matter what age your child is. The other thing I've learnt to do as a parent, and gosh, I didn't realise before I became a parent just how much of this I would end up doing is kind of reflecting on my children's needs, reflecting on, what was that about, that meltdown, tonight, or whatever it might be. Or if your child's been a bit distant, or if your child's keeping to themselves, or if they're kind of losing it about stuff, what's that about for them? And also reflecting on my parenting and reflecting on, why did I lose it tonight? Or, what was that kind of got under my skin? And that had nothing to do with my child. That was, gosh, that's from a different time. How can I do that better? Parenting, you don't realise, I think, until you become a parent, how much personal growth is involved, whether you like it or not. But I think it is a valuable time to really reflect on your responses, to reflect on the needs of this person growing in front of you, and to think about, whether your responses match the child sometimes, because often they match a different era, a time when you were a child perhaps, and that response was what was given to you. It's a challenge sometimes, isn't it, parenting? I think knowing about procedural memory is incredibly helpful, and also it takes any of the judgment out of it. Everyone for generations has been doing their best. It's helpful to have those conversations with your partner, if there's a partner, to say, I think that was my procedural memory kicking in tonight, not in a good way. So how do you deal with that? Okay, because I noticed you do it differently. Okay, well, I'll try it that way next time. It just kind of opens you up to appreciating where your responses have been influenced by, and learning new ways of doing things. In an ideal world, your approach between yourself and your partner will be consistent. It's not always possible. Two parties aren't always up for responding in the same way, in which case your child will quickly learn over time that perhaps, one parent is the go-to parent when they're feeling upset and the other mightn't be. And that is what it is. It's ideal, obviously, if you can be on the same page, and that's what you strive for. But if it's not always possible. Remember too, at the end of the day, you do just have to be good enough. You have to do these things often enough that a pattern's develop. So these things happen more often than not, but there's no expectation that you'll be a perfect parent, because it's impossible. And children don't learn from perfection. They learn from seeing people muck up, make mistakes, figure out how to fix them, because that's how relationships work in real life. If this is an area where you think, okay, I've still got a bit of learning to do, or there's things I'd really like a bit more guidance on learning how to do so I can shift some patterns with my child, then you reach out and ask for help. The Circular Security Parenting Program, which I mentioned before that I'm trained in, that's a good one to keep a lookout for, but otherwise speak to your family doctor and see what services are around, or speak with your centre director, and they might be able to point you in the direction of some good parenting services nearby too. I'm going to finish with this goosebump slide, because this slide, I've imaginatively named it this, but it does always give me goosebumps. I want you to remember, on the days where it's actually hard to prioritise your connection with your child, that just as you've laid down your procedural memories based on how you were parented, your child is laying down procedural memories based on how you're parenting them. Anything that we can do to add to our children's beautiful procedural memories of being parented, whether it's delighting more, being comforting when it hadn't been something that we had known ourselves, helping them just enough, really trying to get that balance right, touching, connecting, laughing, having fun with them, whatever it is that you've taken from this tonight or that you reflect on in the days ahead, anything we can add in, that then gets passed on to future generations. And you find not only have you benefited your child, but you've benefited your child's children and children to come. It's incredibly powerful and incredibly important, this parenting gig. I know it's really hard and it's really busy and it's extremely exhausting sometimes, but it is so important. And that's why this topic for me is the most important topic of all of those I'm ever asked to speak about, because I think it has the most power to make difference for, generations to come. If you do have any questions, pop them in now while I just go over the last couple of slides and just mention my resources here, and then we'll jump over to those questions. If you did want to have a look at some resources, I have got some online on my Dose of Awesomeness site. You're very welcome to check those out. They're all video based. So particularly if you have a friend who's not part of Only About Children and doesn't have access to webinars like this, then that might be a nice place to point people. Otherwise, I'd love to keep in touch with you on my social media platforms too, where I get around to sharing articles and tips that are of help as well. And I know you have a whole lot of articles and resources on your Only About Children website too, because they've done such an amazing series with the Grow With Us series.